When I ask people, like, would you replace your doctor with an LLM? They go like, no, no, no. A couple of years ago, if I'd asked that same question about self-driving cars, people would have said the same. But then, like, you go to San Francisco, you're like,
Everybody's in a Waymo.
Yeah, everyone's in a Waymo.
It's okay if you didn't know. I think people started feeling comfortable with that fact.
One thing that AI and tools will now mean, you don't need to necessarily understand a certain domain very deeply to go pretty far in it.
A lot of this happens only, when you actually spend a lot of time with the tools.
If you're not thinking as much, the models will get you further along. Great products aren't built that way. They're built on like spending time and thinking things through.
Any other philosophies you've had?
Unlearning old habits, learning new habits is just something we all need to get used to.
Former speakers on the podcast have also said what we're using today is perhaps the most silliest version of what we're using.
As these models become more capable, as we have more innovation on top of them, I think you can imagine them spitting out, sort of apps and things that you can interact with. But at some point, I do think that it's coming.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversations. The space where creators, founders, and builders look for all the support and concepts to grow their ideas into products. We've all been hearing on this podcast and also seeing around in the world how AI is transforming every aspect of our life. I mean, the fascinating part is how it's just turning all the traditional ideas about product development, building, and shipping all upside down. I mean, who needs a big team when you've actually got AI as your co founder? So, how are the best product leaders using AI to move faster and smarter? And in fact, how is all of this concept of one person business with a swarm of AI agents going to perform in the times to come? To unpack all of this and more, I'm thrilled to have Satyajeet Salgar with us. As a product leader at Google and on the applied AI team, formerly heading YouTube shopping and Google search, with an incredible track record of building products for billions of users, Satya is just at the forefront of this AI and user experience that we're talking about. Satya, welcome to the show and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for the invitation. I'm excited to chat.
For sure. I mean, I've got like a bunch of things to pick your brain on, but why don't we start with one of your latest videos that you did for Tycon, which is, can one person business, especially like can just one person build a unicorn? I was intrigued by this phrase in between in the video that you mentioned, which is we might actually be able to go further and faster alone, which is challenging all of the traditional thoughts around, oh, we have to do all of these things together. Together we make a great team, blah, blah. So how's this mindset different? Tell us more.
Yeah. So I put together the talk based on a few different trends, I was seeing, right? So I'll sort of go through a few of them and then sort of go through maybe how I got to the conclusion, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the first thing is anyone who has built a large engineering team sort of knows that, let's say you have 100 people and I come and ask you, okay, I'm going to give you 100 more people. In like a few months, how much more will you do, right? The answer is never 2x. Right. The answer, depending upon whom you ask, is like anywhere from 10% more to like 30% more. And I think that the reality is, and there was a survey they ran with Eng Leads that sort of the average came out about, between 10 and 20%. And the reality is that the coordination costs increase significantly the more people you add, right? Like all of a sudden, people sort of need to like understand certain things. Some people may have ideas, all of that stuff, right? So coordination costs increase. So when you add people, productivity doesn't grow linearly.
True.
And then there's the second part, which is we are probably living in, and by the way, so even before I get to that, right, there is this trend that you saw of new companies that were dramatically more efficient than before, right? So Lovable, Cursor, all got to really high ARR with 10.
Less than 10 people and, like very small thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can sort of trace it back all the way to like, sort of Instagram, which had 12 people when they got acquired, which operated with very few people for a very long time. And to this class of like sort of AI startups, which again, tens of people.
Yeah.
So you take that trend, you take the fact that a lot of things that companies do have now become componentized. So things that, you would hire someone in-house for, now there are very clean models for you to like, drop ship things or get legal help and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Now, to that, you add AI, right? And the way to think about it is the easiest way sort of I think about AI is like, hey, we're democratizing intelligence. And so as you democratize intelligence and you give people, sort of, a whole bunch of intelligences to like play with, you can sort of get a lot done that you might have needed, other engineers for, or designers for, or legal help with.
Yeah.
I think there's a natural conclusion to this, which is you can go a lot further alone. And
Mm.
that was so I put together that talk for Tycon like based on that trend, and it's something I'm seeing more and more, especially as people build these solopreneur businesses, as people try and sort of do things much longer all alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely see that trend, and I think there's this meme now about who's going to have the first sort of $1 billion solo business, and I think it's coming pretty
Yeah.
pretty.
Yeah. And thank you so much for walking us through how you arrived at this as a concept. And you're right, Satya. I think we've been seeing examples of smaller teams achieving like a lot more, but I think it's more prominent in the AI age because there's this faster route to getting the revenue done. What used to take about a year and two before has just skyrocketed to a couple of months now. I mean, I earlier had Eric Simons on the show, the
Mhm.
co-founder of Bolt, and then he was chatting about how just an overnight cloud model actually changed his whole business
Yeah,
trajectory for StackBlitz to just have Bolt the next day and then have people skyrocket and just join the wait list. And in no time, they could reach like a 10 billion revenue. So it's fascinating how a lot of work that goes before that for sure, but a lot of this gets amplified by AI and more so with AI tools and agents. And
right.
to me, like what was very interesting is also when we say alone, I think it's also the factor that we always think of employees and teammates and people that we work with. But I think sooner it's going to become more of the non-human identities that we start working with, which is technically the AI agents and AI tools. Perhaps like we are alone, but then the fact that those are going to turn as our teammates or those are going to turn as, like a fact for letting us leverage the best and ship things. So yeah, that's interesting too.
Well, if you think of these as intelligences, right? So at least the way for example, right, like I sort of something I'm working through.
Mm-hmm.
Depending upon what the problem is, very often what I do is I'll take sort of four different LLMs. I'll ask them all the question, and it's like
Yeah,
asking four friends, like, "Hey, what do you think
exactly.
about this? Something I'm thinking about."
Yeah.
And maybe two of them say something intelligent, and I go like, "Okay, let me sort of go back. Let me ask them some more."
Yeah.
And the other two is they're like, I'm not super happy with your answers. I'm on these ones."
Yeah.
And I think that's the way to think about each of these. And like anything
Hmm.
else, right? The more you use them, the better you get at using them. The more you use them, the better they understand you and how like to adapt to you. And so all of those things kick
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
I think that's the way to sort of think about these. And so as each person's personal productivity gets higher, you're able to
Hmm.
do a lot more. Like that sort of.
Yeah, and we've been seeing how CEOs of different companies have been giving statements around the whole AI led approach towards their work, different teams adopting AI. And I mean, I was recently hearing from somebody at Intercom say that now bots commit the PRs and they comment on each other's PRs,
Yeah.
and there's like everything is systematized. So I think that was the key for me to look at the fact that, oh, with AI, there's intelligence. That's like one route to getting better at productivity. The other part is also there's there's the leverage to adopt systems and basically like convert any idea into an actual system that can work.
Yeah, 100%. There's the use of systems, which again is, sort of large companies,
Mm.
but for solo founders, right? Also, like
Mm.
it's a great removal of blockers to your point, right? Which
Right.
is, let's say, there are all these examples of like, people that wanted to like start a business, had no idea how, needed a legal contract drafted.
Right.
And got a little bit further because, using ChatGPT or another
Mm.
LLM, they were like, okay, here's what a draft looks like. Oh,
Yeah.
I need to do this. So
Yeah.
I think it sort of, the sort of learning that you need to do, the sort of, blockers that they had, all
Mm.
of those get knocked down a little bit. So
Mm.
it's not just, you can go further alone. A lot of the blockers that you might have had to even get
Yeah.
started
Yeah.
now sort of get reduced.
No, very true. And also, like the fact that it's okay if you didn't know. I think people started feeling comfortable with that fact because earlier, when you don't know something and you felt like there was nobody to help you around, it just felt stranded in terms of, oh, like because I don't know this, it means that I can't start something. But now, like you said,
Sure.
it just makes so much sense to, like, I hear people quoting about, oh, I just ask Perplexity, I just ask ChatGPT. Like, it's like
Yeah.
picking up friend's brain. And it's nice to see that the fact that it's like made people go forward and like you said go further alone, so much promise in that.
Yeah, no, no, 100%.
Awesome. Satya, so as we're talking about people, team, and this whole productivity as a concept, I also want to touch upon the founders talking about the whole revenue per employee changing dramatically with AI. Especially, we're seeing the faster route to 10 million and then a billion
Yep.
as well. So, what changes do you foresee in terms of team sizes, in terms of also like how is it really going to be operating at the scale with a small team? Just some thoughts around productivity, team size, and also you can share your perspectives from large company to this, small startup as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'll talk both about sort of the changes that, sort of I see at work as sort of
Right.
at a large company, but
Right.
also like changes that I'm seeing at startups that, where
Mm.
I'm advising people, which is I
Mm.
think one thing that you're seeing is the lines between functions are starting to slowly collapse.
Mm.
The example that I often give is when I started, we sort of I've spent most of my career in product management. When my first job out of school, I sort of had a vague sense of what a product manager did. I was an engineer, but I didn't really understand it.
Right.
And when I became a PM, I did a whole bunch of things that, was a little bit of UXR, was a little bit of program management. I didn't really do design, but I was lucky that, I worked with a great designer on my first PM
Mm.
job and taught me a little bit about, okay, this is what good design looks like, this is what you should look for, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
I think over time, what you're going to see though, but and then at some point I started working with a data science team. But before that, I used to sort of do some of my own log stuff. And I
Right.
think what ended up happening is as building products became more complex, as companies became bigger, it made sense to have specialization. So you had sort of
Mm.
uh,
Yeah.
needed a program manager, you needed a designer, you needed a UX researcher, you needed a PM. I think one thing that AI and tools will now mean is you don't need to necessarily understand a certain domain very deeply to go pretty far
Mm.
in it,
Mm.
right? So you don't need to understand how to do like deep sort of
Version.
analysis to be a good
Mm.
analyst, right? You can sort of go get that done.
Mm.
You can sort of kick off a very simple UXR strategy by just, asking LLMs to like draft some surveys, send them out. So you have all these tools now that are like you're able to sort of utilize
Mm.
for these things. And by the way, this works in the other way as well, right? So it's easier for a designer to like get some product specs. It's easy
Yeah.
for an engineer to like generate, sort of product requirements or
Yeah.
designs.
Yeah.
The tools they're not perfect, but they're getting better every single month,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So all of a sudden it makes sense to, I wouldn't say collapse these functions necessarily,
Right.
but suddenly one person has a lot more leverage to like do a bunch of these things. And then
Yeah.
of course software engineering, like you said, like you can go much further with code, like because you have like really good coding agents, etc.
Yeah.
So I think what ends up happening is if you have high enough sort of agency and high enough determination, and frankly patience and grit to like use all of these tools and
Absolutely.
learn them, you can get pretty far. So to me, that's sort of the biggest change. The people,
Mm.
like I think the silos make less sense. They
Right.
generally have like the people that are most successful even in big companies, the ones that are able to like sort of cut
Get
across
things.
functions and have these impacts. But now I think the tools give them even more leverage to do that.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And it also makes a lot of sense from enabling the existing folks who've done well to kind of like exceed what they've been
Yeah,
doing. And you made a, couple of great points there, especially in terms of, I think I mean, addressing them one by one, right? The domain part is so true because I've been all my life in a SaaS product as well, worked across a bunch of domains. But just about 6, 7 months ago, I took up, a sort of a AI PM role in a completely different domain. And if not for a lot of these AI tools being around to, help me co-think and sort of collaborate and understand a bit more about the market and a bit more about the domain, I think it would have definitely been like a slightly different route. And I think it's also defying the point that what used to be like folks used to say, oh, you need to be this domain expert. You need to actually like learn this or know this domain much prior before you actually take up some sort of a role, which works okay in certain very regulated domains or very, very specific domains. But otherwise, I think with AI, there's like a, farther path that we can go in learning a new domain.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was definitely like one point. The other one was also, I think you were talking about the whole people are able to show and sort of like add to each other's point. I think now it makes the whole co-creation easier because earlier it just had like a lot of boundaries. I mean, as someone who's worked in large orgs and now in a startup, I can see how earlier it was kind of like easier for us to say, oh, like, this falls into design, this falls into data science, and there's this handoff of things, which seems like pretty normal when it's perhaps like a couple of years ago kind of a thing. But now I think the boundaries is a little blurry, and it's nice to have it that way also, is because now you can make, I don't know, like opinions or claims not just
Yeah.
baselessly, but then you have something to actually show as proof.
I mean, I think, I honestly a lot, if you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have said, oh, by now,
Hmm.
I would expect every sort of product discussion to be with the prototype because you don't necessarily need to sort of go through the cycle, write a PRP, write
Yeah.
a design. I think the tools, at least my experience is they're not quite there where you can do it every single time. But there are lots of PMs who I work with that come with a working demo to have a product
Yeah.
discussion,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think as the tools get a little bit better, like I think you'll see that more often, but it is pretty common even now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, for sure. I can't agree more there. As someone who's doing it every day, I totally empathize with what you say. And you definitely made one of the most important points, which a lot of people miss. That is to actually have the patience to play around with the tools.
Yeah.
Because there's this whole concept, like, I mean, when you open social media, there's this whole thing that people get swept away, which is, oh, like I built this in 2 hours, I built this in an hour. And there's this whole thing around rush and velocity. Well, that is great. I also think a lot of this happens only when you actually spend a lot of time with the tools, when I jokingly say babysit, but then we've come far away from babysitting it, but rather spending more time collaborating with these tools, collaborating with these LLM models. So yeah, that's a very important point that you made, which is to spend that enough time to understand the, first principles and the tools in themselves.
Yeah, no, and again, like you can get pretty far, but it's still like at the end of the day, it's like garbage in, garbage out, right? Like if you put
Yeah.
in very little, you get
Yeah.
models are great at lifting. Sorry, let me put it this way: the models are great at lifting the average, right?
Yeah.
So if you're not thinking as much, or like there's a base level, the models will get you further along, right? So
Yeah.
you'll have like a half decent thing that comes out.
Yeah.
But great products aren't built that way. They're built on like people spending time and thinking things through. And so I do think, to your point, the tools aren't quite at the point where they will by themselves generate something incredible. So you have to put in
Yeah.
the effort, the work to make that happen as well.
Yeah. I like that. Raising the average, the bar of that.
Yeah.
That's, yeah. Yeah. That sounds good. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's like a bunch of studies which have said that, right? Like if you sort of
Yeah.
give, first time you give
Yeah.
LLM to people, the performance of the people that are already like really, really good improves slightly, but
Mm-hmm.
it's people that aren't performing as well that improve the most dramatically. So it lifts the average, but it lifts the average by like lifting the people at the bottom of the distribution the most. Uh,
Yeah, that's
and,
true.
and I think that's the current state of things.
When, former speakers on the podcast have also said what we're using today is perhaps the most silliest, version of what we're using. And adding to your point, like a couple of years down the line, there's going to be like models are going to become cheaper, intelligence is going to become more, and there's more for us to come in terms of trying out. Yeah, makes
Yeah,
sense. Yeah.
100%. 100%.
Yeah, yeah, cool. I mean, all of this is so incredible, right? I mean, we are sitting here and talking about how agents can help us run stuff, but yeah, this is fun. And any other philosophies if you've had apart from the whole your experience of seeing PMs with prototypes and having discussions by brainstorming with the models? Anything else that you've fundamentally seen change as a sense of principle or psychology from a product development perspective? Because you've managed large teams like 1,000+ folk teams to now we're talking about this concept of single person company. So anything else that you particularly want to highlight?
I think so. I think with all these things, right? Like the change comes and then it comes slowly and then suddenly, right? And
Yeah.
I think it's change at sort of established organizations is always when you have a lot of infrastructure and things are working a certain way and like
Mhm.
they're already going well, will always take a little bit longer than when you're starting from scratch.
Right.
Right. So I often tell people you'll see sort of, the adoption of the latest tools, sort of a new way to do things first at, sort of startups just because they're starting from scratch and can
Right.
rethink. rules and models and how to build things, versus larger companies where already like you have a bunch of infrastructure and things are going well. And I think there's this sort of goes to just hesitancy to change things, but also like the adoption of certain things, right? So the
Right.
example I was giving, like if you take it on the consumer side, right, the example as I was giving people was
Mm.
all of these tools are pretty good. Let's take a sort of out there example, right? Like
Yeah.
all of these tools are pretty good at medical stuff,
Mm.
right? But
Yeah.
no one is like rushing to replace their doctor with like a chatbot,
True.
right? And I think there's something about, because the stakes are high, because we're used to it, we sort of, we're like, no, no, no. I like when I ask people like, would you replace your doctor with like, an LLM? They go like, no, no, no. Like,
Mm.
by the way, even if you show them a bunch of studies that show that like, for diagnosis, like these things perform just as well, etc. Right?
Mm.
But if you take a look at like, I think a couple of years ago, if I'd asked that same question about self-driving cars, people would have said
Mm.
the same, which
Yeah.
is, oh, I can't imagine. Like there are many people even today. You ask them like, will you sit in a self-driving
Yeah.
car? They'll say, oh, no way. It's like there's no way I can do that. But then like you go to San Francisco, you're like, oh, like
Everybody's
Waymos
in a
are
Waymo.
everywhere. Yeah, everyone's in a Waymo. So I think these things, sort of take a while and then suddenly they change pretty fast. I, I mean, I remember like, but I think the pace of AI is, it's going to happen a lot faster than anything else, right?
Mm.
So, for example, mobile for like I've been working in tech a long time. Like mobile was
Mhm.
supposed to be the thing that came next year for like 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Then
True.
suddenly it was like, oh, there's only mobile. I
Yeah.
think this one is different, right? Like I think here the pace is exponential. So it
Yeah.
felt like we talked about it and then suddenly it was there.
Yeah.
And for many people, like they weren't even talking about it and hit them. So the pace is pretty different. So I think, sort of adoption curves on this stuff are going to be like so I think all of us will have to change our mindsets and
Mm.
adapt much faster than we've had to any other sort of tech revolution or change. And that means, by default, like I think unlearning old habits, learning new habits is just something we all need to get used to. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and it'll happen
Absolutely.
like it's happening really quickly. I think that's the big
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I think, like you said, there's the last time that we remember, oh, when was this model released? I think by the time we could recollect that,
change.
there's the other model coming up. And I'm
Yeah.
sure for most of them, even inside OpenAI or inside Anthropic, it's so hard to keep up with the models, right? For them to think about when was this released, and by the time they could actually like do some retro on top of that, there's already something else that's brewing up. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I've been, I've been working in the space now for, I guess, a couple of years, right,
right,
around AI, right,
right.
which is, and I remember when a lot of the early days were like, oh, can you believe the model does this? Can you believe this other model has come out that does this? And at some point, we're like, yeah, you just assume the models will. Every day you're going to wake up and like something new is going to happen.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is dizzying. I remember early on, I was just like, how do I stay on top of this stuff? And then at some point, I realized, like, no, if it's important, someone will tell me. It's fine. Uh, the rest I can just keep on track of.
Yeah,
Keep,
that's true. Somebody was telling me that it's okay to not be the first mover here. Like it's okay to not have the first mover advantage. Like you can always be the second hand listener and still like keep on top. I mean, nobody's like making you win in the race of, oh, you do this first, but
you know
it's
about
more
this
about
first?
like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think you're right. Like I think when things are changing so fundamentally, understanding the fundamentals, understanding directionally what's happening is
Right,
important. And then I
right.
think again, if there's a subdomain that you really care about, spending time in
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, like I find there are enough. If something's super important, you will find out a week later. Nothing.
The world's
You're not
going to
going.
tell you.
Yeah, you're not going to lose that much.
True. I think that just calms a lot of people listening to this podcast who's already like thinking, oh my God, there's something else getting released by the time I'm listening to this. So yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
I think, and again, like I was there for like a year, right? Where it's like, how do I'm reading all this stuff? How do I stay on top of it?
Yeah.
And then at some point, I was like, it's fine. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
also I think you understand the direction a lot of these things are
Mhm.
moving in at some point, and then you go like,
Yeah.
okay, like
That's true.
get, and then
Yeah.
it's a question of like
Yeah.
what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's also mapping it back to what you really want to get out of knowing this, right? To your
Yeah.
point of, hey, like this is a sense of direction. This is the outcome that I want. So knowing about this makes sense. I think that would be more relational than, yeah, just wanting to keep up with the news because that's always going to be like, it's just out there, but then it's not going to add any value to your knowledge or your kind of
Yeah.
intelligence you want to keep up with.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think even for me, there's two layers, right? To be in tech and like to be curious about these things. But then there's a second part of like, okay, there are things that I'm building or working on or I care about.
Hmm.
Uh, there you can afford to be less like, sort of you sort of need to understand the trend and then
Yeah.
bet on that versus like,
Yeah.
okay, what happened today, what happened tomorrow? Because then it's so much is happening, you get distracted pretty easily.
Hmm. Fair enough. Yeah. So they're going back to something that you mentioned a couple of minutes ago. I really, would love to dig deeper there. One is we were talking about medical as a use case and
Yeah.
understanding how folks actually, still prefer going to doctors. And by all means, that's true because it's a very hardwired concept in us to get to seek help, especially when it comes to medicine or anything that
Yeah.
involves money, like financial sectors where we're just so comfortable going after a certain set pattern. But I have a very contrasting question to this, which is, hey, if the same thing, because is it because it's in a chat UI or something like that that you feel like, oh my god, like something could happen to this data, as opposed to, let's say, a doctor's place that actually uses an application that uses AI. Let's say there's sort of a medical CRM or something like that that
Yeah. Yeah.
folks use at hospitals or something like that, like which again uses the same AI. But then the fact that does that play a role, because we were talking about adoption and the whole friction, right? So I'm just trying to understand, is the friction because of just the mindset, or is it also going to be very different as we change the modalities of it, or as we change the way
This is
yeah,
like chat is a modality and a
yeah,
UI.
yeah.
Well, I've sort of I've gone back and forth on this, right? Which is
Hmm.
on the one hand, I think chat is a terrible UI.
Yeah,
On the
agreed.
other hand, I think let me put this way, right? Which
Mhm.
is I think the goal of all interfaces should be to eventually move at the speed of thought, right?
Mhm.
Which is you think of something, you want something to happen, and it should happen. Like the
Yeah,
computer should do the thing.
yeah.
I think we have built UIs to help people sort of efficiently do those things. As they've gotten more complex, we've added GUIs, and then like these things did so many things. You had to like click on something and then click on a
Mm.
sub tab and click on all of that stuff, right? And I think the promise of, let's say even before chat, was the promise of voice was, hey, we're going to flatten all the UIs, right? You want to do that thing that's like 3 menu clicks deep. You just say, do this, and you want
Mm.
that to happen, right? And so the promise of like first voice control, but then
Mm.
also chat is that the UI gets flattened,
Mm.
right? So text and voice as input make a lot of sense to me, right?
Mm.
As sort of input modalities.
Right.
But as an output modality, it's not
Mm.
100% clear that what you want spit out at you is
Mm.
very often voice is the wrong thing. And even chat, right? Like sometimes, yes, I want text as the input and I want sort of, text as the output. But very often I don't. Like I just, I need a table or I need like an
Yeah.
app that does something or I need an image. And
Mm.
again, sometimes the input can be video and image,
Yeah.
not text.
Yeah.
But I think there's something as humans, right? Like it starts with voice because we think we have words that express what we wanted to do. It's
Yeah.
very easy to go to voice and text, and
Mm-hmm.
then but I do think like as an out, we will have more flexibility in these UIs. Like
Right.
right now, the LLMs, you know, it's easiest for the LLMs to deal in words.
Mm.
It is as these models become more capable, as we have more
Mm.
innovation on top of them, I think you can imagine them spitting out, sort of apps and things that you can interact with just as easily as today they sort of spit out text. And so to me, like I do think we'll evolve, but I
Mm.
do also I think I've become more appreciative of why, sort of especially as an input, voice and
Mm.
text are useful as a way to
Yeah.
control things.
Yeah.
But to that point, right? Like I think as you get more input modalities, as people use glasses more,
Mm.
sometimes people might want to point to things to make stuff
Right.
happen.
Right.
You'll have more modalities sort of come in there. So I do
Right.
think things will evolve. I
Mm.
do think a simple chatbot. It's the best we have. Like I don't think we've been able to innovate on anything better yet.
Yeah.
But I think you can see elements of like sort of apps being generated and sort of real time UIs. Like you can
Mm.
see that being a lot more common
Yeah.
over.
That's interesting. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. And I think, like you said, there's also like early promises of that we're seeing with independent platforms, right? Like there was Perplexity launching Perplexity Labs, where you can actually,
Yeah.
do all of these research and gives you some format of a financial report or some format of an app or some modality to kind of play with. And individually, I think, yeah, coding agents are able to like take a one shot at a lot of what you explain to them. And that's also where I think your transcription tools get better with your voice to text summarizing and a lot of those input modalities for sure. I think it's also to some extent, I don't know how it could apply back, but I've also been thinking about this from a product perspective, right? The fact that, just as you mentioned, we used to do a lot of sub tabs, the UX elements for us
Yeah.
to do product were very different back then in terms of, oh, like this should definitely be a tab versus this should actually look like a table versus, oh, it takes 10 clicks to do this. And sometimes we took pride in sort of saying, oh, this is how an exact flow should look like. But now I also feel maybe like we're entering a time where it's all, it's sort of, we're not going to an interface less kind of a interface where, we actually don't have to have SaaS applications that should have 10 tabs or 10 pages or, whatever it
Yeah,
is.
yeah, no, 100%, right? So especially for UIs where you had like, menus and submenus and tabs and all of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like you should build a product that's easier for people to use. And now I think like in some ways it's easier to do that. I mean, I think the sort of in the, let's call it the old world of product design, we were taught about simplification, right? Like take
Hmm.
away options, make it easier, all of that stuff. And I think that should still be sort of, I think that as a design tenet still holds. But now
Mm,
for people that want more complexity,
mm.
you don't have to hide something in the settings thing, or like you don't have to have like a
Yeah.
super menu. You just, hopefully when they use the words to describe what they want, like your
Yeah.
product is smart enough to make that happen. So I do think all of that stuff. I don't think most products are there yet, right?
Mm,
Like I think right now a lot of these complex products, right? Like in this app case, we're typically talking about enterprise applications, and we want them to sort of behave like we expect, sort of these LLMs to. Right now, they haven't made that transition. At least most haven't. But at some point, like I do think that it's coming. They're all trying, so I think that's
yeah.
coming.
Yeah,
Um,
no, and because you've been in working in that applied AI space, right? Is this something that you and your team are thinking about, especially in terms of how's this interaction going to happen? How UI or the whole user experience is going to turn? Is that something that Google and particularly your team you've been like thinking about?
we've been thinking about it a little bit, but I think my team sort of operates more at the, hey, what's a little bit further out. So
Hmm.
we've been working a little bit with the Astra team, a little bit with
Right.
sort of the Mariner team on quality and stuff like that, right?
Mm.
So it's like, what are things that people can use right now, but really
Right.
will be more used a little bit further out.
Okay.
Um,
Nice.
but I do think, but it is something we think a lot about, especially with as
Mm.
people use, sort of. My team focuses more on platforms and devices, so
Hmm.
people use Android more and Chrome more. What are the sort of innovations that they're expecting? And I do think input modalities and output is a huge part of that.
Yeah, no, I totally remember the time that NotebookLM changed a lot of this, right?
Yeah,
I remember when it launched, there was this whole craze around, oh, I could, given input modalities like some random piece of text, some set of links, something, it's almost like a dump. Basically, like I can just
yeah,
dump a bunch of things. And there's like a podcast. Oh my God. And I remember how the modalities as such became a huge thing last year, I think around the same time or a couple of months down the line now. Yeah, sometime
yeah.
around
I
September. Yeah.
yeah, I know the folks that work on Notebook LM really well. I remember hearing about, oh yeah, we'll put this in and we'll make a podcast out of it. And I remember seeing early things that I was like, okay, it's cool, but will anyone care? Right. And I think it's a lot of, like clearly people did, right? Like when people
Mm,
got there, like I think people are like, oh, we love learning in this format. It makes it really easy to consume this information.
yeah.
But B, I think the team spent a lot of time making sure the quality of those podcasts was like
Right.
really high. It wasn't
Right.
the first level of like, oh, you know, let's try and like put some voice on top of this stuff. So they, I think, to that extent, like to our point earlier, right, the quality and the care that you put in into
Hmm.
polishing that product makes a huge difference. Because
Hmm.
at the end of the day, like people want to interact with something that is like that, is that they really enjoy, that gives them an
Hmm.
emotional high, right?
Yeah.
And I think forming something that people form this emotional bond with is like the hard part of product development. And AI makes some of that easier, but it makes some of it harder because honestly the bar has been raised now.
Yeah.
uh, and so to me, like NotebookLM, to your point, audio overviews and NotebookLM is a great example of that, right? Like I don't think anyone could have predicted so many people would have cared about voicifying,
Yeah.
like, their documents,
Yeah.
and that it could be entertaining in that way. But
Yeah.
it proved that it was possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of that.
Yeah. No, for sure.
And I think
I
that's one of and maybe that's one of the other things that I think with AI, that a lot of these things that we thought were not possible are now actually possible, right? Like
mm,
you're someone that likes learning things in an audio format. Now you can do that. In time, like if hey, you need a video for everything, like it'll be available, right? The example I give people is like I have young kids, and I was trying to generate a test for my daughter, who was like at the time she was 7, and I
mm.
was like, oh, do this math test, but make all the problems about princesses and like
Nice.
unicorns and all of that, and it spit it out. And
Yeah.
she was a little more involved, like reading that
Oh,
paper.
sure.
And I think those are just little things that you can do to like make life a little bit
Yeah.
easier.
Yeah. That's a fun example. I think it just reiterates the point that we chatted about in terms of the modalities are going to become much more aligned with the way people want to see. So I think we wouldn't be surprised maybe down the line if people just chat to make their own UI in the product. So
Yeah.
basically, like enter chat or like again, like maybe a bunch of modalities together. But yeah, like, hey, I want this screen to behave this way, or I want this to see this way, or it could even be a very non screen thing where all they care about is outcomes, which is basically like, yeah, just ensure that A or B gets done. And yeah, that's your job. Just get this done.
Yeah. And I think, the thing that we just said, right? Like the technical pieces exist to do this now, right?
Yeah.
Sort of automation exists,
Yeah.
UI generation exists. We roughly have a sense that the LLMs can do this.
Yeah.
But I think it's either the models need to get suddenly better that they can do all of this for you, or like a bunch of more likely a bunch of product stitching needs to happen so that all of
Hmm.
this sort of gets pulled together. And
Yeah.
I do think it's coming, and it's coming soon.
Everybody's sort of talking about this from different lenses, but going back to the original point where we started all of this, which is the whole friction habit, anything else that you see as, observations in terms of, hey, like there's still hesitancy in this and versus, oh, but by the way, I also see folks enjoying to do this more from a, just picking your brain from a behavior standpoint.
I think so. I think there's like the enterprise and consumers, right? I think in enterprise, as these things, like, let's put it this way: a year ago, I think people talked about hallucinations a lot more.
Yeah.
I think, I think it's less of a concern now, just because the models have gotten better. We've understood how to safeguard these things, but also, like, I think people, for certain applications, people now know how to put in safeguards so that
Mhm.
like these things match what you're expecting to do. I
Yeah.
think for consumers, there's excitement, and I think all of us people. It's interesting to see how different people use these LLMs, right? So a lot of
Mm.
people use them from everything from like sort of like people use it for therapy and for as companions and all of
Yeah.
that, to like, okay, I'm using this to answer questions, to study, to like help with homework, to like design my house, all sorts of things. And I think like as people use them in more and more aspects of their life, right? Like I think and again, like as adoption generally goes, it's I think young people use this the most. I think it'll sort of slowly spread to the
Mm.
general like I think the general population sort of uses it, but I
Mm.
feel like young people use it very differently from like, let's say, older people, or
Right.
or sort of
Right.
professionals that use it to like answer questions. And I think as that equalizes over time, like hesitancy will go away to use it. And as they become more capable, like I think the VO example was a great one, right? Like, which is so when VO3 came out, like it looked finally like so I have this so there's a show that used to be there's a show called The Last Airbender that's like anime, and then they made a Netflix live action out of it. So my kids and I love watching the anime. We watched it a couple of times. And so when the live action came out, they've changed the story. And I remember I was talking to my kids about, oh, I wonder if you can just, and I did this like, I was like, hey, can you analyze the difference between how they changed the story between sort of the anime and the live action? But if you look at what Vio has done, it's not crazy to imagine in a couple of years, like my kids go like, oh, but I didn't like the fact that they removed this character. Can you add it back in? Can you tweak it? Can you do this? Right? The pieces will exist to technically do that. It might like burn a lot of GPUs, but like the pieces exist to sort of do something like that. So then I think habits, once that becomes possible and people start expecting it, habits will change and sort of people will adapt. And so I think I think the world looks incredibly different of consumer habits in like the next, couple of years. And so I do think things will, as the models change and what becomes possible, and by the way, things become possible and then things become cheaper. I think you'll have a lot of sort of innovation in the consumer space.
Yeah, it's so true. And looking at how, it could seem very laughable today, but then the fact that some of that could even happen just in a couple of weeks. I think for me, you brought in an excellent example with VO3 because last year around October or November, I remember telling a couple of my friends, I used to play around a lot with AI filmmaking. So
Yeah.
I was telling my friends that, oh, nowadays I think the models are all very disparate. There's, I have to use, let's say, a mid journey to generate images. I
Yep.
want to go to these video models, generate video, then get maybe like 11 labs or some sort of a audio in and then stitch them all together. And I was like trying to build this whole like a side project, but sort of an idea of, oh, but why would somebody have to do all of this? Why can't they just do it in one platform where this could orchestrate the entire workflow for them? And then yeah, like a couple of them were like, oh, that sounds great, and some of them were like, oh my god, like that's like super difficult to build. And then there was just VO3 as a model, just replacing all of what I was thinking as orchestration, which is, yeah, just put what you want in. And then there's audio, video, everything stitched together as
Yep.
an output for you. So the pace at which this whole psychology is changing in terms of, oh, I want this done, and you actually get it done. I think, yeah, that's like so astonishing.
Yeah, 100%. I think, as these tools get democratized, right? Like it's very much like sort of YouTube democratized like access, right?
Yeah.
Anyone could sort of put something up
Yeah.
and sort of find an audience. I
Yeah.
think this is another step of like democratizing creation. I think again it's still early, right? And the tools, like I tried to like make a video of a knock knock joke using Flow, and I was like, okay, let me have it be a couple of sequences. And it took a while, right? Like it took a while to generate these things.
Yeah.
Then I was like, I want you to tweak this, tweak that.
Yeah.
And again, like as people use the tools, get better at
Mm.
them, you'll have like even more sort of,
Yeah. Yeah.
creators and creators in the way these things are built.
Yeah, I actually have a very silly, a kind of a thought there. Would love to know what you think, which is the same thing I think when we used to do it with people in terms of being able to like work with people, being able to like go to 10 people to ask for something versus actually spending all of the time with AI. I think people are feeling more comfortable to kind of do that iterative work with AI in the sense, oh, like I'm
Yeah.
okay sitting with these models. I'm okay like trying to get super specific about, oh, like change that, go do this, as opposed to like let's say it's saying the same thing to like 10 different people and then all of going
Yeah.
back
The
to the
models don't get
coordination work.
upset at you, right? The models don't get upset at you. You're not worried about what they're feeling. I think, yeah, 100%. And I think there's some things, especially, and I think this is why a lot of like people even sort of turn to the models for therapy and like private conversations.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
private, right? Like,
yeah.
you're not worried about another person judging you or like
Mm.
or any of that, right? So I think, yeah, like I think all of that holds.
Yeah. What still surprises me, those like, when we do use these models. And then the other day I saw Gemini actually like it sounded so much like human in terms of I was trying to use the Gemini model in coding. And it kind of said, it's so frustrating that I see this error. And I'm like, oh my God, wait. Did the AI model actually say it's frustrating? And did it actually say, oh, I'm going after all of this? Like it's nice because it's still sounding like a human, but then, like you said, there's no layer of judgment or there's no layer of, oh, like I'm answerable or, some sort of all the complex
Yeah,
emotions that we deal with in people's context. Yeah.
no, that's true. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Wild times, but yeah, so much fun.
Wild but interesting, right? Like I think it's yeah, it's an interesting time, and I think the position we're in to be able to like think about the space, work in it, I think
Yeah.
it's a pretty lucky position to be in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Honestly, like it's the best time to learn all of these. It's nice because most of the folks who've been on the podcast earlier also said how it's taking us all back to the learning phase. Like no
Yep.
matter you're like the CEO or a builder or a founder, whatever it is, you go back to the whole thinking about it from scratch and mostly from the first principle. So it's nice to see everybody on that ground finally and not, like all up in a very different state.
No, no, 100%.
Awesome. So as we wrap, I'd love to like know how your daily product workflow has changed with AI. Because you're talking a lot about this. You did share a few examples of your personal experiments. Is there like something that you would say as your favorite X pattern that just emerged out of AI? What's been on your mind for the coming times? Yeah, just feel free to share.
I don't know about this isn't necessarily a UX pattern, but I do think it has changed. So one of the things you do with the PM is like as a PM is you have ideas and then you sort of
Mm, mm,
articulate them.
mm.
And I think for me, so I will say like it's weird. Like a lot of people use LLMs to write PRDs, which I think is the worst thing you can do because I think a lot of it is I think at least for me, a lot of the act of writing a PRD is you clarifying your own thinking as much
Right.
as it is like you writing for others. There's sometimes sure you're writing for others and then you can just spit it out as long as it's clear to them, it doesn't matter. But I think when it's something deep, right, like you're
Mm,
clarifying your thinking first so that you can solidify it. So to me, like LLMs have been most useful as a brainstorming partner. It's changed. I find that the rate at which I'm able to get through an idea, ramp up on a
mm,
space, and have what I hope is a sort of solid opinion is but again, at least the way I use it is less as, hey, let me generate a doc that I can read. It's much more, let me generate 10 docs. Let me try and like
right.
get a bunch of different perspectives
Yeah.
and then write it and get it challenged.
Right.
I do think in general, the so to me, like personally, that's been the sort of biggest unlock.
Right.
You asked the question about UX, right?
Mm,
One thing I would say is treating models as consumers of your work is also pretty smart, which is,
nice. Yeah.
I think, sort of, you can literally sometimes show, Gemini or one of these like, hey, is this UI better or this UI better? And it'll tell you why
Yeah.
one is better than the other. And that saves you a bunch of time on research and experimentation and stuff, because honestly, these things are pretty good at sort of, averaging human reactions to a lot of these things.
Yeah.
That's one tip. But to me, like the biggest sort of unlock has been in just personal brainstorming in
Yeah,
productivity.
the thought partnership for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also like, I think, in terms of leveraging and also enhancing, because when we just think about at it from a stage A, the stage A to Z is so much easier with these models. So it kind of like breaks the singularity that we always look for, because there was always
Yep.
like the one best idea or the one most important thing that we think about. But to kind of arrive at that, we need to understand a lot more, cover a lot more ground. So I think for that, like you said, like generate a bunch of things, go through a bunch of things, and the LLMs, like in terms of like ask the same question to 10 other LLMs and see which one suits the most for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, breaks the
Yeah.
singularity.
And again, it's effort, and over time, you'll sort of learn your patterns. I think we're still early in like sort of LLMs really understanding you and your
Mm.
preferences. But yeah, I think once all of that starts kicking in, you'll see more of that.
Yeah, slowly I think we're there in terms of getting better with context at each interaction level, all of the memory that it stores about us and answerable. It's nice to see all these Twitter prompts that people put in to say, oh, like this is a singular most question that you have to go ask your O3, you have to go ask your,
Oh yeah, yeah.
Claude 4 and your Gemini, and look what it says about you. So it's nice how it comes back to one of those. I was jokingly thinking it comes back to those BuzzFeed kind of quizzes, where we just used to have
Yeah,
fun
that's right.
taking those quizzes.
Yeah, I would not have predicted all of the become like social media or like what does your LLM think of you becoming like, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and so much fun. Awesome. Satya, thank you so much. This has been fun. I
Fun
loved all
conversation.
your takes.
No,
Yeah,
it was
no,
awesome chatting. Thank you for the invitation.
thank you. Likewise, I had so much fun discussing a lot of the examples that you shared. And also, I think the single most aim for me is to bring the practical ways in which somebody is using AI these days, and especially from a product building lens. So you did a great account of sharing what's been working for you, how you've been thinking about AI. And I hope the folks who are listening to this as well are able to pick more inspiration from that, and also reach out to you if they have more questions around this.
No, no, absolutely. This is a fun conversation. Thanks.
Thank you.